You're listening to Cool and Unusual Punishment presents Chosen. This is our final episode. My name is Tyler, and joining me as always, my wife and co-host, Jody. How does it feel?
Normally, you don't say that I'm your wife. I mean, I'm assuming most people know that, right? But if they didn't...
Try to keep it professional.
I bet they're...
They're married. Oh, that must be why their chemistry's so good.
I'm great. Yes, this is the final episode of Chosen. We have been doing this for over a year. We thank everybody for your patience. When we did Lugenbild, it was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I was furloughed. And we were at home, and it was very easy for us. The point being that it was very easy for us to turn out episodes because we had nothing else going on. But, you know, the shocker of it is that we both have other jobs that have been extremely stressful for both of us this year. So thank you, everybody, for your patience just in waiting. But let's get into this.
Let's get into this.
Guess what?
What?
This episode is about Valleybrook Church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, as it is today.
Oh my God.
Yes. A funny thing happened. I heard from the pastor at Valleybrook.
The current pastor.
I heard from the current pastor at Valleybrook maybe a couple of months ago now. He reached out, and I was quite surprised. I've been pretty intentional with making sure that everybody understands that this is not any commentary on the church as it is now. Very specific period of time. Have I been curious about the church as it is now? Yes.
Yeah.
But this was not about that, you know. But he reached out and actually asked us if we wanted to meet with him. So we did. And we went to Valleybrook, which I personally have never.
Yeah. Yeah, no, me neither. It was interesting to be in the building.
Definitely. It's undeniably a very interesting space. For those of you who aren't familiar or haven't looked up what it looks like, it is in an old theater in downtown Eau Claire, across from an old functioning theater.
Yeah.
So it was unusual.
Yeah. Well, do you want to talk about that meeting?
Yeah. I mean, here's what happened. And I will admit some things, which I also told Travis when we met, that, you know, he reached out, and like, I know that there are folks who have been impacted by what happened at Valleybrook who would not be interested in going into that building now.
Yeah.
And am sensitive to that. And I am sensitive and understanding that there are folks who might not like that Valleybrook still exists, or, you know, how some of the things have played out. And Travis has been the pastor there since 2017. So, you know, just to make it clear, what happened at Valleybrook happened. Then there was an interim pastor, which I didn't fully understand until he explained it when we met. Just that's a very common thing when a church goes through some sort of trauma and there's like a removal or however it works of the current pastor. There's like this neutral party who comes in who can sort of absorb all of what's going on there before they move on. What all occurred with the interim pastor, like, I'm not speaking to that myself.
Right.
You know, but this guy came in, you know, 2017, was originally from the area to some degree. So, you know, but we met with them, yes. And what I was going to say also being sensitive to all that, my thought was I didn't want this to be just some sort of like propaganda.
Yeah.
Where it's like my job then to be like, oh, guess what? We went to the church and had a wonderful chat.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's a fine line because we've been speaking about Valleybrook in a very specific time period. But the truth is we have been for over a year now doing podcasts where we're saying the words Valleybrook and abuse in the same sentence. I can't imagine it doesn't have some effect beyond the scope of what we're talking about.
Right. And, that's going to happen when you keep the name.
Yeah.
But also, right, I'm sure that's a thing. I was hesitant to meet with Travis because I didn't want this to be something where, keeping in mind, especially the victims of all of this, whom I've talked to and who are just listening and I've never talked to, I did not want this to be like everything's great. So we met and had like a really good conversation. And honestly, just talking about, most of the conversation was talking about the podcast and like how that was filtered through somebody like the current pastor at Valleybrook, and asking questions about like how we did stuff, and asking us questions if we had questions about stuff. And like after that, I wasn't really sure what to, if anything, that I was going to do with that, because just to do a podcast where it's me saying, oh, this is a really nice guy, everybody, like,
yeah.
But the one thing that did happen that is largely the reason why we're doing this particular episode, I had asked about these recommendations from the CIT to the Valleybrook overseers. This is part of the report that's in maybe our very first episode.
Right. And at the end of the report, they had this list of guidelines, recommendations for what to do going forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
My curiosity was in wondering how many of those things had actually been done. So I asked, like, where do you think things are at with that? And like in the moment in that conversation, it was like recognizing that some things could have been done differently or better had certain things been known, but then like feeling like, yeah, I think we responded to those things. And keep in mind also that Travis came in where some of these things have probably already had been responded to by somebody that wasn't Travis, But in the aftermath of that meeting, he, reached out and asked, like, what do you think would be beneficial, if anything, and suggested responding more directly and in print to like these recommendations and how, he feels that they were followed. And I said, yeah, sure. Also saying I would be happy to share that, while also wanting to remind folks that I'm sharing his assessment.
Yeah.
I haven't investigated this.
Right.
So keep that in mind, but it's probably helpful to revisit these recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, number 1, and it's just a bullet pointed list, but it's extensive. All management level pastors should resign if they've not already done so, and be given a short severance package conditioned upon professional counseling. The interviews were inconclusive whether any support staff need to resign. A Converge representative should read aloud the general findings and recommendation to the church at a designated churchwide meeting. A professional review or audit should be conducted immediately by an outside entity, If embezzlement or significant mismanagement is discovered, consideration of legal action should be examined, which we do know how that part
Yes.
didn't exactly go.
Yeah.
Terminate the Valleybrook version of the Wounded course and eventually replace with the originally published Wounded. Suspend the Pure course for the next season of ministry. They can only be restarted when professionally trained people can facilitate the classes. Confrontation of Doug, Nate, Grant, and Mary as the key people creating and maintaining this abusive environment. And there's some sub things here. The confrontation should require confession statements to be written, approved by the transitional leadership team, and read to the congregation only after genuine repentance begins to bear fruit. Each of these 4 pastors needs to enter into a humble, submitted restoration process, pursuing true healing and wholeness. I mean, listen, I'll keep reading these, but we know how some of this went down.
Yeah.
Everybody, for the most part here, there's one of these people that's the whole reason why this happened, thankfully, while also participating in the process of the spiritual abuse. But I chuckle as I read these because these guys were just like, oh, we're moving. Goodbye.
It seems like the the restoration, there needs to be genuine repentance. You really have to self-reflect and grow. And I guess if you don't want to do that, you just get out of town.
Then just go start a church somewhere else.
Yeah.
If they refuse to submit to a restoration process, their ordination and or licensing should be stripped and their clergy status removed. A simple letter of refusal to repent should be drafted by the Valleybrook overseers, which can be shared in the future with any prospective new church employment opportunity. Interesting. Okay. If they refuse to meet with the crisis intervention team and Valleybrook leadership and submit to the recommendations of this report, the Valleybrook overseers will revisit the severance arrangement. Suspension of all full-time vocational ministry should take place until the restoration process is completed, no matter how long that takes. Transitional leadership needs: find and hire an interim pastor, minimum of 1 year, who can do the following: love on this wounded congregation, preach Christ and the cross as the means of forgiveness and wholeness. Current overseers need to immediately read a confession of their failure in leadership to the congregation, written in consultation with the executive minister of Converge Great Lakes. Okay, I'm a little interested to see what the response is going to be to some of these things because, I don't know if some of these things happened.
Yeah.
Our stuff kind of stops with the really, the financial audit and whatnot. But a lot of the people stopped going that shared with us. So it's not been really clear.
I am interested in that, a lot of, when there's a business, a corporation, if there's a lawsuit, you can settle, you can kind of move past things without really speaking to the wrongdoing. And a lot of this is specifically focused on confession and in terms of recommendation. I think it's good that is a focus of this, is acknowledging the failures.
Yeah. The problem with this, of course, is that you are dealing with people who are at varying degrees of acceptance or denial as to what their part.
Yeah.
You can lead a horse to water, so I'll be interested to see, how much of this actually even could have happened. What are you going to say? Oh, this recommendation says you should read this confession. Yeah. I suspect there are people who are just Valleybrook, what's that? Huh?
Yeah.
What? What's that church?
Well, yeah.
And then just want to pretend like they've never gone there.
Right. And Doug's refusal of sorts when he left was very much that report's bunk anyway. So why do I need to answer to that? Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't talk to me.
Right.
Current overseers tender their own resignation once the transition period is completed, or before if it becomes apparent they cannot function in the new environment. Develop a transitional leadership team that would have representatives from outside the congregation and a few from inside, current overseers who would be stepping down at the end of the transitional period. This transitional leadership team should include the interim pastor and 2 to 3 outside converged leaders. Part of their responsibility will be to develop a process by which future leaders can be identified and brought into the leadership as an overseer by the end of the transitional period. If it is discovered that proper procedures were not followed in changing to the current Constitution and Statement of Faith, then, at least for this transitional period, the previous Constitution and Statement of Faith should be followed. Oh boy. After the transitional period is completed, if there are any changes to be made to the Constitution and Statement of Faith, proper procedures should be followed. The remaining administrative staff is given counseling paid for by the church, which might include a group therapy session by redacted for the remaining staff. Counseling should be paid for by the church for those interviewed and who were recommended for counseling by the crisis intervention team. Simplify the church's ministry structure to core practices and review which departments have been deeply influenced by the former leaders.
Probably get rid of that X-Man team.
Yeah. Yeah. So, those are the recommendations.
Yes.
Let's get to Travis's letter. Travis Albrecht, lead pastor at Valleybrook Church. And this is a lengthy letter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not upset about that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, this guy had some college courses. He understood the assignment. Okay, this was December 19th. And this is written to you and I.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just going to read it.
Mm-hmm.
To Jody and Tyler, as your chosen podcast comes to a close, I want to express my gratitude to you for shedding light on the wrongdoing and spiritual trauma that took place at Valleybrook Church during Doug Lebsack's tenure. It is clear how destructive and abusive religion can become when misused, and how it can negatively affect countless lives. Hopefully, your sharing of these stories will prevent similar spiritual harm in the future. For my wife and I personally, Valleybrook is dear to our hearts. It is where we attended while we were in college. Kendall Anderson, who started Valleybrook in 1993, was our pastor at that time. I do have to say that he had some cool stories about this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I said I was just going to read this, but here, like this guy was, I think, what maybe Doug in some ways wanted to be. This guy like rode a motorcycle.
That's the story I remember. Yeah, he was pre-Doug. He wanted to have this church that was not stuffy the way other churches are, and that's the story I remember. Is that because it's a theater. It's a big.
Yeah.
The main area is like it's a theater with a stage, and he like rode a motorcycle up onto the stage.
Yeah,
sounded pretty cool, honestly.
We were married here in 2001. We moved back to Eau Claire in 2017 when I became Valleybrook's lead pastor to help with her restoration and building. We accepted the role, having a fairly good idea of what had happened and of the task it would take to rebuild trust. When I met with those who were still at Valleybrook and those who had left, I heard about their experiences. It broke my heart. Your podcast was a helpful reminder of the pain, and it also shared some things I wasn't aware of. I am deeply sorry to those who were affected. Church and religious leaders aren't supposed to be like that. Our hope in coming back to Valleybrook was to rebuild trust again by modeling the truth of the gospel within Valleybrook and within the community, unlike the previous leadership. We remembered the positive impact Valleybrook used to have, and we wanted that again. In order to renew Valleybrook, we set out to create new ministry teams, new small groups, a new logo, mission statement, core values, and to have good policies in place that help ensure safety for the congregation. Staff and elders have orientations that include a review of what happened in the past and introductions to all policies. All staff members, including myself, have annual reviews. The membership reaffirms each elder annually. Every annual budget is approved by the membership, and we have added an annual ministry report meeting where the congregation receives the previous year's financial report, which is generated directly out of our accounting software, every line item with no estimates, audit results, and staff ministry reports. Shortly after I began, we remodeled the lobby in 410, our connection area, because as we learned from those who returned, the physical space reminded them too much of their pain. Last year, we remodeled the exterior with the same intentions. While we understand that a new logo and paint does not solve the problems of the past, we are making every attempt to help show we are a different church. We hope that these steps will help in people's healing process. The road wasn't easy. There was a lot of pain, distrust, tension, and trauma to navigate, and I'll be the first to admit that we were not perfect in every decision. However, because of God's mercy and a group of hardworking people, along with the support of other local churches and Converge Great Lakes, we are a different church than we were 10 years ago. We acknowledge that even though we have changed in many ways, it doesn't make the pain and sins of the past go away. We have and we will continue to talk about what happened and do what we can to help become a positive influence in our community again. When we met, you asked for me to respond to how Valleybrook acted upon those recommendations from the crisis intervention team. Here are those answers. Oh, I just love the organization of this. It's really appealing to me. All management level pastors should resign if they've not already done so and be given a short severance package conditioned upon professional counseling. The interviews were inconclusive whether any support staff needed to resign. Doug resigned 2/15. Nate resigned 2/15. Mary resigned 3/24. And this is 2015. All of these dates. Grant resigned 2/8/2015. While a basic severance was initially approved for them, before details of what happened came to light, it was quickly revoked for Doug and Mary due to further information found by the audit of mismanagement of funds and failure on their part to be part of a restoration process. In addition, the transitional leadership team requested the return of severance already paid. That request was refused. A Converge representative should read aloud the general findings and recommendation at a designated churchwide meeting that was done on March 29th, 2015. A professional review or audit should be conducted immediately. An audit was started as soon as possible by Whitfley Accounting, and it revealed mismanagement of funds. The transitional leadership team discussed the possibility of legal action with our retained lawyer, and discussions with our lawyer guided our decision that legal action would not be initiated by Valleybrook. Just a reminder here that Travis was not,
he was not here for this. He's speaking to things that happened before.
Yes. I just want people to remember that.
Yeah.
However, Eau Claire's district attorney could still take up a case if they deemed there was enough evidence to pursue it. Valleybrook's attorney shared with the investigator that if the DA wanted to press charges, that Valleybrook would fully cooperate. We now have a certified bookkeeper process our checks and balance our accounts. We also have a policy in place for an annual internal financial review with a team of non-staff members, along with an external audit by a certified CPA every 5 years. The internal financial audit covers things such as verifying weekly deposits, reviewing any non-payroll payments made to pastors and staff, and large payments, along with other items. Audits are shared with the congregation at annual meetings. Terminate the Valleybrook version of Wounded course and eventually replace with the originally published Wounded. Suspend the peer course, and they can be restarted when there's professionals running them. The Wounded course ended in June 2015. It was not offered or taught again, and neither was the originally published Wounded course, which I think is fine because it's like The Wounded Heart is the book that this was all based on, which was about like childhood sexual abuse. And if you're going to do something like that, there's probably more like materials that aren't so specific to that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the book was specific and then it was broadened in a way that I don't know how you could retool that in a way that doesn't dig and exploit trauma the way it was. Like, yeah, I think you.
It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The knitting together teaching ended when Doug resigned. The Pure course also ended and wasn't offered again. Another sexual purity material through a reputable published book has since been offered with properly equipped leaders. Confrontation of Doug, Nate, Grant, and Mary as the key people creating and maintaining this abusive environment. The confrontation should require the confession approved by the transitional leadership team. Doug and Nate left town shortly after their resignation. There was no official statement of confession provided to Valleybrook's congregation from Doug, Nate, or Mary. Even though Grant resigned, he worked through an official restoration process and shared a confession and repentance statement publicly. Of course he did. Like, no shock how that shook out, right? Each of these 4 pastors needs to enter into a humble, submitted restoration process, pursuing true healing and wholeness. If in agreement, teams will be set up involving at least 2 pastors from other churches and a few leaders from within the church. Professional counseling is a required must for each. So Doug and Nate refused. Mary did not enter the process. Grant went through a restoration process that involved confession, counseling, coaching. A public restoration service was held for him on March 13th, 2016. That's a good amount of time.
Yeah.
If they refuse, their ordination and or licensing should be stripped to that whole thing. The simple letter of a refusal should be sent to the overseers. Doug, Mary, Nate refused the process, so letters dated June 11th, 2015 were sent revoking their clergy status. If they refuse to meet with the team and Valleybrook leadership and submit to the recommendations of this report, the Valleybrook overseers will revisit the severance. The severance to Doug and Mary was part of their original resignation agreement prior to that transitional leadership team being formed. Doug and Mary's severance was discontinued after only a few payments. An attorney's letter was also sent requesting repayment of paid severance, which was refused. Lame on their part to
well, they've done nothing wrong. Why would they return it?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Suspension of full-time vocational ministry should take place until the restoration process is completed, no matter how long it takes. Doug and Nate refused, and I should say Nate Hagedorn. I've been just saying.
Yes.
That's every Nate mentioned so far is Nate H. Nate Hagedorn.
I forgot there's another Nate.
There is. That's still at the church.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we should point that out.
Doug and Nate H. refused the process. They left the area. And as we know, tried again.
Right. Well, they wrote their letter of refusal through Nate's wife or something, put it on a website.
Mary didn't pursue further ministry. Grant returned to ministry after his restoration, which good for him.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely. I don't mean to say it dismissively.
I know nothing about this guy except his name and his letter, and he's my hero.
Transitional leadership needs. Find and hire an interim pastor who can do the following: love on the congregation, preach Christ. Tim Hagen was hired as an interim pastor based on his experience at other churches in crisis. He began Sunday, April 5th, 2015. He stayed until May 14th, 2017. A lead pastor search team was formed in fall of 2016. Travis, was hired May 7th, 2017, and started July 1, 2017. Current overseers need to immediately read a confession of their failure. All the overseers resigned minus 2, and those 2 did share a public confession.
Well, that's interesting. A bunch of them just straight up resigned.
Yep. I remember we had an episode called The Resignations.
Yes.
And it was like some of that surfaced in there where To be honest with you, I think most of the people who resigned weren't like doing it because they were like, this is really bad. I want to just get out of this. I mean, not that that maybe wasn't part of it, but I do think a large amount of them were like, this is crap. Like, I'm with Doug.
Right.
I don't agree with this. So, I don't want to change.
Hashtag I'm with Doug.
Merch idea.
Yeah.
Current overseers tender their own resignation once the transitional period is completed or before. Well, all of them except 2 resigned either before or after the same time as Doug and Nate Hagedorn resigned. The 2 overseers who initially remained were the 2 who were demanding change. They were vetted by Converge, and while they did resign their former overseer role, they were then accepted as members of the new transitional leadership team formed in the aftermath of the leadership change. These 2 former overseers left leadership when that transitional team was dissolved upon installation of the new elder team in 2017, which was as directed. Develop a transitional leadership team that would have representatives from outside the congregation, a few from inside. This transitional leadership team should include the interim pastor, 2 to 3 outside Converge leaders. Part of their responsibility will be to develop a process by which future leaders can be identified and brought into the leadership as an overseer by the end of the transitional period. And I must point out that the things I'm reading, I did say, like, listen, this is somebody else's assessment.
Yeah.
But this is just largely factual. It's hard to argue with a lot of these things. I mean, it's all dates and, The transitional leadership team was created in April 2015, and the members of the team were vetted by Converge leadership and were provided with training. The team consisted of interim pastor Tim Hagen, the 2 former overseers, 2 congregational members, and 2 pastors from other Converge Great Lake churches. This team met 1 night a week, plus 1 full Saturday every month for an entire year. They oversaw the nomination of a new replacement elder board to replace the transitional leadership team, drafted a new church constitution with extensive feedback loops, reviewed procedural shortfalls, implemented new procedures, oversaw the financial audit and presentation, met with former and current members, and performed numerous other activities. I will point out that we did have an episode talking about the audit to some degree. I never had the opportunity to actually see the audit, but we must remember that Matthew Mitchell recorded that audit meeting, and there were folks who from this group that were very unhappy with him about that. I think the lawyer for Valleybrook, well, I do know that the lawyer for Valleybrook was also from a very prestigious law firm in Eau Claire and was also very religious. And because of that, drew lines with things that I think were not good. And I would say that if you're having an audit meeting and people want, it was like you have to only take notes. There was no handouts given, remember?
Yes.
You could not record the meeting. There was an odd installation of that. And of course, I'm not saying Travis had nothing to do with that.
Right. Yeah.
But the way that was handled was not great. And then when it was discovered that somebody had some recording, it was like, you got to meet us down at Acoustic Cafe and show us that you're deleting this.
Threatening offers get made, Acoustic Cafe. Yeah, I remember see, I don't know if we used any of the recording because I think it was kind of bad.
It was very hard to hear, unfortunately.
Hard to hear, but there was a tone that it was supposed to be we're doing this, but it doesn't leave this room. And I think a lot of the questions were kind of sidestepped and
the audit was a Cliff's Notes version of what the audit actually said is what was, it was highlights. So yes, this was done, but I will say they did not do a good job of that. And that's my assessment. If it is discovered that proper procedures were not followed in changing to the current Constitution and Statement of Faith, then at least for this transitional period, the previous Constitution and Statement of Faith should be followed. After the transitional period is completed, if there are any changes to be made to the Constitution and Statement of Faith, proper procedures should be followed. Valleybrook operated according to the previous long-standing Constitution, while the transitional leadership team reviewed the situation, formed a Constitution team, and drafted a new Constitution. The new Constitution was created through the work of a Constitution team. It now consists of greater levels of accountability for staff, elders, and the church. It was presented to members and approved. The remaining administrative staff is given counseling paid for by the church, which might include a group therapy session for the remaining staff. Any remaining staff were offered paid counseling. It is worth noting that only one former staff member, who was not listed in the report, is still currently on staff with Valleybrook. He went through a very extensive restoration process directed by Converge, involving public confession, counseling, and pastoral coaching. Counseling should be paid for by the church for those interviewed and who were recommended for counseling by the team. Valleybrook paid for counseling sessions for numerous people, both leaders and lay members who were interested in taking part in counseling. Simplify the church's ministry structure to core practices and review which departments have been deeply influenced by the former leaders. The transitional leadership team revisited all core policies and procedures. It also reviewed each area of ministry, including specific practices and resource needs, and made both changes and recommendations. Many new policies and procedures were created to clarify our core functions, create a safe environment for the congregation, and to create accountability for both financial actions and personal actions. Also, he doesn't mention it here, but when we were talking to Travis, he did talk about just the collection of donations, like every week. Remember, like people, pass the plate or whatever. Like that whole thing is very regimented, because when Mary Clark, who was in charge of the finances, like would have like a
sack of money in her office. Yeah.
Yes. Like.
like a literal cartoon burglar. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that does not happen anymore, okay. Having seen the devastation of what happened to Valleybrook, we are committed to never letting it happen again at Valleybrook. One example that has greatly helped us was joining with Be Emboldened to host a spiritual abuse workshop that was open to both Valleybrook and the community at large. The workshop included topics like Spiritual Abuse 101, Flags to Watch Out For, and Rebuilding After Spiritual Abuse. Information was shared about ongoing programs and support networks. Our current leadership is also working on writing and implementing a spiritual abuse policy, which we hope to share with other churches. I hope this helps convey the steps Valleybrook took to address the spiritual abuse by previous leadership. To those who were abused, I want to give my sincere apology. While we continue to grieve the suffering caused, we are committed to continuing to do what we can to help with healing and rebuilding trust. Sincerely, Travis Elbrecht, lead pastor at Valleybrook Church.
I will say I said I wasn't going to comment too much, but it would have been easy, I think, to, in the wake of this, to say we're going to fix things by we just won't do the things that Doug did. Mm-hmm. But it does feel impressively proactive in terms of like all the financial audits, how much is presented to membership and very intentionally publicly available. The spiritual abuse thing. But yeah, just it does feel like it's the things that went wrong, making sure like that those can't happen again, and barricades and safeguards in place. Yeah, I'm really quite impressed. Yeah.
Most churches don't have to go to these lengths.
Yeah.
But, like, honestly, they should do it now so that this doesn't happen. I think it's the same as so many things, right? I mean, how that all happened and, like, the folks impacted by that. It's always like you watch something on Netflix or some documentary or whatever, and you think, like, oh, my God, that's crazy. Like, I can't believe that happens. And then like something happens to you personally or something happens in your community that's like becomes a thing. And you realize like these things literally can happen anywhere. So it's good to be proactive, even if it's never happened to you.
Yeah, it can happen anywhere. And it also happened like kind of at the height. Valleybrook had like over 1,000 members or something.
Yeah.
Was it 1,200? Like they had a huge congregation. In addition to while these things were happening, it was just a huge institution. It really was growing.
I think by the time things got bad, that number had changed. But while the seeds were being planted,
yeah,
and some of the, like, as the young kids put it, ick was probably being experienced, I think a lot of people were silently pulling away. And that's the other part, just in general, that's like the point of the series that we do, plural, is like just to remind people, like when something's not okay, say something about it, because like I'm sure there were just scores of people who were like, this is creepy, or something happened to them. And it was like, go get away. Don't ever talk about it, because this is a big institution. And like, we don't want to be the ones that are, because you could see what happened to people who left and they were shamed. And it's tough, to be brave in situations like that. So I guess that's a good way to close this, is to just thank the people who were brave enough to reach out to us, give us their stories, who held on to papers for years, hoping that somebody would do something with it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to be vulnerable and be like, I was a victim to this. And, people can sometimes feel embarrassed and things like that. And I'm just glad that there were folks who could push through that and reach out. And it's been a privilege to do this series. And I'm glad we could give voice to folks. This is it. It's crazy. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Stay tuned. We are not going away. We are coming back with another big story.
I don't know how fast we're getting into this new story. Do we have time for Poor Man's History?
Potentially, although I think we're going to be getting into this story very quickly.
Okay. We have another podcast we haven't talked about in a long time. It's called Poor Man's History. We're still hosting it, so I want to at least mention it. I think it's very good for what it's worth. Listen to it. And we'll be back. We'll be back soon, I guess.
Yeah. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
1,
Stay tuned.
3. I have been making presentations for a final escalation. I have been praying to the God of giving up. She says, lock the door behind you now. Before the criminals and the cops break in your house. Oh, I have
Chosen has been presented by Cool and Unusual Punishment. Research and interviewing for this entire series is by Jody Haas, with editing and mixing by me, Tyler Haas. Our theme song is by Zavely, with additional music by John Wright, Christian Ayan, Harry Advino, and Arthur Benson. The song you're hearing behind me right now is by The Taxpayers. Special thanks to Matthew Mitchell, Jesse and Matt Irwin, Travis Albrecht, Kaylee Evergreen, and Jody Hagedorn for speaking with us for this series, as well as everyone else who reached out with information or leads or just encouraging words. Thank you as well to Trey Dorn and the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network for supporting our show. If you enjoyed this series and want to support us making more investigative stories like this, please take a moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening. It helps our little show find more listeners, and we rely almost entirely on word of mouth. If you want to get in touch with us, you can send a message to us on our Facebook page or by emailing us at mail@coolandunusualpunishment.com. Our website, where you can find links to all the materials and documents we've referenced in this series, is coolandunusualpunishment.com.
So fuck this city, fuck this job, and break it down before you even reach the top. In a God-fearing land, there ain't no lodging for the mad. You can't get high enough to breathe. You can't get high enough to breathe. You can't get high enough to breathe before you drown.
Is that biblical? Sorry. I'll not turn this into another X-Men joke fest.
Oh.
Well, Logan betrayed Christ. You can go on. I got nothing else.